Sometimes, one story is enough to change a heart forever. Welcome to Heart Change Stories.
Wouldn't it fall? They set up the shy deaf girl on a date for a joke. Let's assume what
They set up the shy deaf girl on blind date for a joke. What the single dad CEO did left them froze. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed softly across the open concept floor of Genevant's Medical Technologies, one of the most respected biotech firms in the state. In a glass-walled conference room tucked at the edge of the 27th floor, 3 middle managers huddled over coffee and spite. Kyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk curling on his lips. "He's not real," he muttered. "Who? Daniel?" Bonnie raised an eyebrow. Kyle scoffed. "Come on, no one's that perfect." Widowed CEO, raising a 6-year-old, still finds time to check on the interns and help janitors fix the vending machine. "Please," Max chuckled, nodding. He brings his daughter Ruby to company picnics. Everyone thinks he's some kind of saint. But saints don't get promoted, Kyle added sharply. And he's 2 board votes away from overseeing national expansion. That should have been one of us. Bonnie glanced around before lowering her voice. "So, what are you thinking?" Kyle's eyes glinted. "Expose the act. Put him in a situation where his kindness isn't convenient anymore. Let's see if he stays Mr. Nice Guy." The plan unfolded quickly. Through a friend on a dating app, they arranged a blind date for Daniel. She was beautiful, smart, and kind, but also deaf. Lena Park, a content writer for nonprofit organizations, known for her gentle presence and sharp mind. Her profile had been mostly overlooked, except by them, who saw a perfect test subject. They sent an anonymous invitation from a curated match profile, suggesting dinner at Riverside Grill, a well-lit, upscale restaurant near the river, known for its intimate booths and excellent acoustics. Kyle had already arranged for a tiny wireless camera to be hidden in a floral centerpiece on the table. Max tested the feed on his phone. "It's perfect," he said. "Crystal clear. We'll see every reaction." Bonnie tapped her nails against the table, excitement mixing with something more bitter. "So, what's the endgame?" Kyle leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "When she arrives and he realizes she's deaf, one of 2 things happens. Either he gets awkward and bails, exposing him, or he tries to fake through it and messes up, also exposing him." Max nodded. "We clip the moment. Upload it to the internal forum. Let the board see that the golden boy cracks under pressure." Bonnie laughed, uneasy but intrigued. "That's cold." Kyle's voice hardened. "So is being passed over year after year." He stood and straightened his blazer, looking down at the tablet, showing the dinner reservation. "Everyone's kind," he said, quoting with a smirk, "until kindness becomes inconvenient." As they walked out, confident and smug, none of them questioned the ethics. They weren't looking for truth. They wanted a crack in the armor. And tonight, at 7 p.m., they were sure they'd find it. Daniel Reed arrived at Riverside Grill 15 minutes early, just as he always did for important meetings. But this wasn't a board presentation. This was personal, and that made it far more nerve-wracking. He paused before entering the restaurant, tugging gently at the collar of his shirt. Ruby's words echoed in his mind. "Daddy, don't forget to smile. Mommy said your smile is like sunshine." The memory warmed him, softened the stiffness in his shoulders. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The maitre d' led him to a corner booth, semi-private, but open enough for subtle observation, perfect for the hidden camera tucked among the peonies at the table's center. He ordered water, adjusted his sleeves, checked his phone. No new messages. He glanced at the entrance. Then she walked in. Lena Park moved with quiet grace. Her dress was a simple shade of blue, the kind that complimented without demanding attention. Her blonde hair was tucked behind her ears, revealing delicate silver studs. But it was her eyes that drew him in, focused, scanning every face, every mouth. She paused to look at the host, watching carefully as he spoke. She was reading his lips. Daniel's expression didn't change, but inside, something clicked. He knew she was deaf. There was no moment of hesitation, no flicker of discomfort. When Lena turned and approached the table, her steps measured but unsure. Daniel stood and greeted her, not with awkward fumbling or exaggerated speech, but with his hands. He signed, "Very nice to meet you." Lena froze mid-step. Her eyes widened. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, her posture relaxed. A breath she had been holding slipped out, and the corners of her lips curled upward in disbelief. She signed back. "You sign?" Daniel nodded, a quiet smile forming. "I do. Not perfectly, but I'm learning." From a booth on the upper level, Kyle watched the feed on his phone screen. Bonnie leaned over his shoulder. Max sipped his drink, waiting for the fireworks. But there were none. Instead, the man they had expected to squirm was now sitting across from the woman they had chosen as bait, and he was signing. Smoothly, calmly, sincerely. Bonnie blinked. "Is he fluent?" Kyle didn't respond. His jaw tightened. At the table, Lena eased into her seat, still trying to process what was happening. No pity, no confusion, just kindness. Daniel handed her a menu and signed, "Would you like me to translate, or do you read lips?" Lena shook her head lightly, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "I read, but thank you." She had been expecting the usual, tense smiles, fumbled words, sudden excuses. Instead, she found something she had almost given up on: respect. And for the first time in a long time, Lena Park allowed herself to feel something unfamiliar at a dinner table. Hope. The candlelight flickered gently between them, casting a warm glow that softened the edges of everything around. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversations and the occasional clinking of cutlery, but their booth felt like a quiet cocoon, insulated by something unspoken, something tender. Daniel spoke with both voice and hands, seamlessly flowing between spoken words and sign language. Each motion was fluid, deliberate, and calm. When the waiter brought the menus and began rattling off specials, Daniel glanced at Lena and began signing every word, slowly, gently, with the ease of someone who had long been comfortable in silence. "The sea bass is their specialty," he said out loud while signing. "But the mushroom risotto is what I usually come here for." Lena watched him, first with guarded curiosity, then slowly, her expression softened into something warmer. She nodded, choosing the risotto, not because of his suggestion, but perhaps because it was the first time in years someone had made her feel included without making it a spectacle. As they ordered, Daniel made sure not to over-explain, not to overcompensate. He didn't treat her deafness as a problem to solve, just a part of the conversation. The subtlety of it, the respect embedded in each gesture, was disarming. Lena found herself leaning forward slightly, her eyes brighter. She signed, "I write stories." Daniel smiled. "For who?" "Non-profits. People who don't have voices. I help tell their stories." He nodded with sincere admiration. "That's beautiful." Encouraged, Lena continued, about how she worked from home, how she liked routines, how she always added a little cinnamon to her coffee even though she hated cinnamon. Her hands moved more freely now, and Daniel followed every sign with focused attention. Then her expression dimmed slightly. 12 dates, she signed slowly. 12 times they left after 10 minutes. Or worse, they stayed and pitied me. She paused, eyes shimmering. They didn't see me, just the deaf girl. Daniel didn't rush to comfort her. He didn't say, "That's terrible," or "You deserve better." He just looked at her with eyes that truly saw her, and nodded, slowly as if to say, "I'm here, I'm listening." Then it was his turn. "My daughter Ruby," he began, hands moving with a mix of skill and a father's affection, "is obsessed with dinosaurs and cabbage juice." Lena blinked, then laughed, the sound soft and sudden, like something surprised out of her. Her laugh didn't echo, didn't draw attention, but it changed something in the air. Daniel grinned. "Don't ask me why," he said. "She says it makes her strong like a triceratops." Negated. Lena laughed again, this time covering her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes smiled. And then, just as their meals arrived, an accident. A young waiter, backing away from another table, bumped into their booth. It was a soft nudge, but enough to jolt the table. Lena's water glass tipped, spilling across the white tablecloth and soaking the hem of her light blue dress. She gasped quietly, startled. Her hands flinched toward her lap, trying to dab the water with a napkin, but before she could do more, Daniel had already stood up. "No worries," he said, already reaching into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled out a crisp, folded handkerchief, the old-fashioned kind, embroidered in one corner. With calm care, he knelt beside her and gently blotted the fabric of her dress. Not invasive, not hurried, just present, respectful. Then, without hesitation, he slipped off his jacket and draped it lightly over her shoulders. "This will keep you warm until it dries," he said, then added in sign, "You're okay." Lena froze for a moment, eyes wide. It wasn't the gesture itself, it was the way he did it. No awkwardness, no forced apology, no exaggerated concern, just quiet, human kindness. She looked at him, her fingers brushing the edge of his jacket. Her heart beat harder than she expected. Not because she was embarrassed, but because something in her was thawing, something that had been cold for far too long. Across the restaurant, behind the potted plants where Kyle, Bonnie, and Max hid, there was silence. Bonnie leaned forward slightly, her brows drawn. She whispered to the others, almost in disbelief, "He's not pretending. That's just who he is." And for the first time, none of them had anything to say. The plates had been cleared. The buzz of the restaurant had dimmed to a gentle murmur. Lena and Daniel sat across from each other, no longer leaning forward in anticipation, but resting into the comfort of something real, something rare. Candlelight shimmered faintly between them, dancing in the reflection of their untouched glasses. Lena traced her fingertip along the rim of her water glass, eyes down for a moment before she looked up, not at Daniel's lips this time, but straight into his eyes. Her hands moved slowly. "I used to think I was too hard to love." Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply nodded once. Subtle, grounded, present. She continued, more fluidly now, fingers speaking the words her heart had held for too long. "Not because I'm deaf, but because no one ever tried long enough to know who I really am." Her eyes didn't fill with tears. She was past that stage. This wasn't sadness. It was quiet truth, laid bare. They saw the silence, the hands, the pauses, and they assumed that meant I was incomplete. They never saw the rest of me. Daniel leaned in slightly, arms resting on the table, gaze still steady. He signed back. They were wrong. Then his voice broke the stillness, gentle, low. "When Ruby was 2, my wife passed away. Heart failure. We had no warning." He paused, his fingers moving in tandem with his words. "Suddenly I wasn't just a father. I was everything." Lena's expression softened. She tilted her head, listening not only with her eyes but with something deeper. Every diaper, every nightmare, every silly dinosaur obsession. "All on me," he chuckled softly, not with bitterness, but fondness. "There were nights I'd lie awake and wonder if I was doing it right, if she'd grow up thinking she had half a parent." His hands slowed, his shoulders relaxed. "But she taught me something I thought I'd forgotten, that even broken hearts still have room to love." Silence fell between them, not the kind that screams awkwardness, but the kind that only exists between two people who've seen things, survived things. Lena reached forward slowly and touched the edge of his sleeve. "Ruby's lucky." He smiled. "So am I." Then, Daniel's eyes drifted, not to her, but to the surface of his water glass. Something caught his attention. A small flicker, a glint, a reflection. He leaned slightly, narrowed his gaze. There, distorted by the curvature of the glass, was the unmistakable outline of a lens. A camera. He turned slowly, deliberately. Above and behind them, on the mezzanine level, he saw them. Kyle, Bonnie, Max, half hidden behind a potted plant, peeking down with pale faces. Daniel's jaw tightened. His chest rose once in a slow inhale, then fell. He looked at Lena. For a second, the weight of the betrayal pressed against him, not just for himself, but for her. She noticed the change in his face, but before she could sign a question, he stood up. "Excuse me," he said softly, then turned toward the stairs. Lena watched as Daniel made his way to the upper level, his stride calm but purposeful. The three culprits scrambled to appear casual, but the guilt clung to their faces like a stain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He simply stood before them and said, clearly, "You tried to use her, a woman with more strength and dignity than any of you will ever understand, as a tool to break me." They said nothing. Their silence was more damning than any confession. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "If this was your test, let me give you your answer." He pointed downstairs. "I choose her." Then he turned and walked back. Lena sat still, not knowing what had happened yet, but feeling it. The shift in the air, the way people around them seemed to hush in Daniel's wake. He returned to the table, sat down, took a breath, looked at her. "There was a camera," he signed. "They set this up. They were watching us." Lena blinked once, then again, not in shock, but in something deeper, something wounded. Her hands moved slowly. "So what was real?" Daniel hesitated. Just a second. Then he lifted his hands. His eyes did not waver. "From the moment you smiled, everything." His fingers shook slightly as he signed, but he didn't stop. Lena watched him, her breath catching just for a beat, not because she was broken, but because for the first time, someone had chosen her without hesitation, without needing her to be anything else. And that, she realized, was the beginning of healing. Daniel drove home in near silence, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel, headlights sweeping through the quiet streets. A soft piano melody played on the radio, instrumental, calm, but halfway through, he turned it off. Silence felt more honest tonight. At a red light, he stared ahead, then slowly lifted one hand off the wheel. Without thinking, his fingers moved. Happy. It was simple. A sign he had taught Ruby months ago, one he hadn't used for himself in years. Back home, the house was dark except for the warm glow of a nightlight in Ruby's room. Daniel walked in and found her curled beneath her dinosaur blanket, clutching her favorite triceratops like a shield. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her breathe, slow and steady. She had been his world for so long, his anchor, his purpose. But tonight, something shifted. For the first time, he thought, Daddy doesn't feel alone. He kissed her forehead, whispered something only she would understand in her dreams, then quietly left the room. Across the city, Lena closed her apartment door behind her and leaned against it, her shoulders dropping, fingers still trembling. The night had been unlike anything she expected, and somehow, that made it scarier. She walked to the bathroom, sat in front of the mirror, and studied herself. Her eyes, still wide with disbelief. Her lips, slightly parted from words never spoken aloud. She reached up and gently touched the edge of her ear. It wasn't shame. It wasn't regret. It was remembrance. Of all the times she'd sat here before, wondering if she was unlovable. Tonight, for the first time, that thought didn't come. She turned on her laptop and opened a bookmarked folder. ASL practice. Personal. She watched an old video of a woman signing slowly. "Thank you for seeing me." Lena paused, rewound, and tried it herself. Her hands moved carefully, a little shaky at first. "Thank you for seeing me." And then again, smoother, more certain. She let the video play once more, this time letting it echo in her silence. And in that small apartment, where she had once felt invisible, Lena Park smiled, not because someone had saved her, but because someone had seen her. It was a quiet, golden afternoon when Lena stood in front of Daniel's house, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked on her way. She hesitated just a second before pressing the doorbell, her heart racing faster than she expected. A moment later, the door swung open, and instead of Daniel, a small figure came bounding out. Ruby, with her unruly curls bouncing and eyes bright with excitement. The 6-year-old skidded to a stop in front of Lena, taking a deep breath like she had rehearsed for this very moment. Her little fingers moved slowly, deliberately. "Hi. You are pretty." The signing was imperfect, choppy, some shapes slightly off, but the intention was clear. Lena's eyes widened. Her hands trembled as she dropped to her knees, meeting Ruby at eye level. Tears welled up without warning. No one had ever done that for her before, not after just one meeting. Behind Ruby, Daniel stepped out onto the porch, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. When Lena looked up, he offered a sheepish smile. "We just started learning this week," he said gently. She really wanted to say hello. Lena looked back at Ruby and, with fingers steadier now, signed, "Thank you. You're wonderful." Ruby grinned, then reached out to grab her hand. "Come on. We made lemonade." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and something slightly burnt. The space was lived in but cozy. Children's books stacked beside a plush dinosaur, a blanket fort half folded on the sofa. Lena felt oddly at home. Soon, the three of them gathered in the kitchen. Ruby insisted Lena sit with her on the floor, where she enthusiastically introduced her to the signs for butterfly, heart, and family. Lena, laughing softly, corrected a few movements and added new ones. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his smile quiet but full. In that moment, watching his daughter signing with a woman he barely knew but somehow already trusted, something shifted inside him. The silence in the house, which used to echo, now felt full. Suddenly, Ruby sat up with wide eyes. "Let's bake cookies." "Daddy, can we?" "Lena, do you like chocolate?" Lena nodded and signed, "Very much." The kitchen turned into a whirl of activity. Ruby measured flour with messy enthusiasm. Lena stirred in the chocolate chips. Daniel was in charge of the oven, though that quickly proved to be a mistake. 15 minutes later, the smoke alarm chirped faintly. Daniel opened the oven to reveal a tray of very charred, very unrecognizable cookies. Blackened edges curled like ancient relics. Ruby gasped. "Daddy," she burst out laughing. "You made chocolate rocks." Lena laughed too, a sound that echoed in the kitchen, light and unrestrained. She hadn't laughed like that inside someone's home in years. Daniel held up his hands in defeat. "I'm officially banned from baking," he said, with mock solemnity. Ruby, still giggling, grabbed a cookie and made a dramatic show of biting into it, then pretended to faint. So crunchy. Despite the disaster, the three of them gathered around the kitchen table with mugs of warm milk and pieces of slightly burnt but still edible cookie centers. They ate, laughed, and shared stories. Ruby talking about her favorite dinosaurs. Daniel sharing the story of how he once accidentally wore mismatched shoes to a board meeting. And Lena explaining how she once misread a client's email and thought they wanted a love poem for their nonprofit's annual report. The warmth of the kitchen, the soundless joy in Lena's expressions, and the sparkle in Ruby's eyes created a moment suspended in time. It was imperfect, chaotic, and completely beautiful. As the evening drew to a close, Ruby yawned and climbed up onto the couch, pulling a blanket over herself. She leaned her head against Lena's arm and mumbled sleepily, "I think you're Daddy's magic." Lena froze, eyes wide. She looked over at Daniel, who had gone still too. Their eyes met across the living room. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then paused. Instead, he signed slowly, clearly, "Thank you for coming." Lena nodded, her smile soft. Then, without hesitation, she signed back, "I'm glad I did." And for the first time, Daniel felt what it meant to come home, and not just to a house. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel received the calendar invite. An unassuming subject line, "Private meeting. Kyle, Bonnie, Max." He opened it, frowned slightly, but accepted it without hesitation. When he entered the meeting room, the three were already seated. For once, none of them wore the smug expressions they usually carried when trying to undermine him. Kyle cleared his throat, unusually hesitant. Bonnie stared down at her hands, and Max avoided eye contact altogether. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Something you need?" Kyle nodded, then pulled out a tablet and hit play. The room filled with soft sounds from the video, the footage from the hidden camera at Riverside Grill. The plan had been to capture Daniel faltering, fumbling, rejecting the date once he discovered Lena was deaf. Instead, it showed none of that. There was Daniel, gently signing, "Nice to meet you." There was Lena, her eyes lighting up. There were long moments of laughter, warm glances, shared silence over truthfully painful memories. There was the moment Daniel stood, gently wrapping his coat around Lena's shoulders after a spill. By the time the footage ended, no one said a word for a full 30 seconds. Bonnie's voice finally broke the silence, raw and small. We thought we could expose you, but all we exposed was how wrong we were. Daniel remained silent, arms folded. His face didn't show anger, only quiet disappointment. When he finally spoke, it was calm but firm. Is this all of it? He asked. Kyle nodded. Yes. And you planned this because you thought, what? That kindness is a performance. Max mumbled. We didn't think it was real. Daniel paused, then said, thank you for finally seeing that it was. He didn't threaten to report them. He didn't demand punishment. He simply stood and said, I believe how we make things right says more about us than how we messed up. And then he left the room. 3 days later, the company's CEO held an all-staff meeting. After the usual quarterly updates, he looked around the room with a smile. There's one more thing, he said. We're thrilled to announce that Daniel Reed will be stepping into the new role of Regional Managing Director. Applause filled the room. Daniel gave a polite nod. He shook hands, thanked a few well-wishers, but didn't linger, because in his pocket, his phone buzzed. A message from Lena. Ruby says she learned how to sign family today. And so did I. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, then placed the phone against his heart. That was the reward that truly mattered. Weekend. The park. It was a golden afternoon, the kind where sunlight filters gently through tree leaves, and the breeze smells like spring and memories. Daniel laid out a soft, blue and white, checkered blanket on the grass. Ruby twirled around him, full of 6-year-old energy. Just as she spotted the ducks near the pond, Lena appeared, holding a small woven basket filled with warm banana muffins. Hi, she signed, smiling. Hi, Daniel signed back. We're glad you're here. They sat beneath a tall oak, sharing bites of muffins and stories. Lena taught Ruby how to sign words like butterfly and dream. Ruby, in turn, created her own new sign, a blend of love and silly, which she decided meant happy. Daniel watched them, heart full. Then Ruby stood up, dusted crumbs off her shirt, and motioned to both adults to come closer. Let's do this, she said with a grin. She took Lena's hand in one, Daniel's in the other, and gently signed, family. Daniel placed his hand gently on Lena's shoulder. Lena reached across and laid her palm over Ruby's. They sat like that for a long moment, not needing words, because sometimes the loudest declarations are made in silence, and in that silence, everything made sense. They weren't just healing anymore. They were becoming whole. Together, 6 months had passed since that first dinner in Daniel's home, since burnt cookies and shy smiles bloomed into something much deeper. The weather had turned warmer, and that Saturday, the three of them drove to the park, blanket in the trunk, a basket of sandwiches and fruit in Lena's lap, and Ruby chattering in the back seat. They chose a quiet spot beneath a large maple tree. Daniel laid out the blanket as Ruby raced ahead to pick wildflowers, her laughter cutting through the breeze like sunlight. Lena sat beside him, pulling out the small containers one by one, while Daniel poured lemonade into plastic cups. Ruby returned with a crown of dandelions and clumsily placed it on Lena's head. You're our picnic queen now, she declared, then giggled and sat between them, holding each of their hands. The three sat in a soft silence, watching clouds drift. Then Ruby, without any prompting, looked up and said thoughtfully, I used to only have Daddy, but now I have Daddy, and you, and a best friend who knows sign language. Lena blinked, surprised, while Daniel reached over to squeeze his daughter's shoulder gently. You're lucky, Lena signed softly, smiling. Ruby nodded. I know. They stayed that way for hours, eating, laughing, teaching each other signs for birds, ice cream, and silly words Ruby invented. No grand moments, just comfort, just belonging. A year to the day after that first blind date, they returned to where it all began. Riverside Grill. Same table, same soft lighting, but this time, it wasn't a setup. It was something they chose. Daniel wore the same navy suit jacket from that first night. Though it fit a little looser now, he'd lost a bit of weight chasing Ruby through parks. Lena wore a cream dress, simple and elegant, her hair loosely pinned back, a soft touch of gloss on her lips. Ruby sat between them in a pink tulle dress, her feet swinging beneath the chair. The waiter brought out a small cake instead of a menu this time, and Lena looked at it curiously. Before she could ask, Ruby stood up, cleared her throat, and turned toward her. With careful precision, her small hands moved through the signs Daniel had taught her in secret for the past month. "Miss Lena, will you be my mom forever?" Lena gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled. And then Daniel stood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Slowly, he knelt beside his daughter, looking up at Lena. "I'm not asking because something is missing," he said, voice soft, "but because everything is better with you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring with a single diamond, elegant and unpretentious, just like her. Lena's tears spilled over. She turned to Ruby and signed back, hands trembling slightly. "Yes, I would love to be your mom." Then she turned to Daniel and whispered, "Yes." But instead of saying anything more, she gently lifted her hands and signed. "Family is not something we have, it's something we choose." Rabadi. Daniel nodded, fighting tears of his own. Ruby launched herself into Lena's arms, and the three of them embraced, laughter mixing with tears. The waiter clapped quietly from the side. Other patrons smiled, some wiping their eyes. But in that moment, there was no one else in the room. Weeks later, Lena stood in front of the mirror at a small bridal boutique. The dress hugged her in all the right places, simple lines, elegant lace at the sleeves. Ruby spun in a smaller version beside her, practicing how to walk down the aisle holding a bouquet. Daniel texted just then, "I miss you, I love you, and Ruby wants to know if your dress sparkles." Lena laughed, wiped a tear, and replied with a photo of her and Ruby twirling together. That night, they curled up on the couch, watching a documentary about oceans. Ruby signed, "We're all lucky," before drifting off to sleep between them. Daniel looked at Lena, then down at Ruby, and whispered, "We're not just a family, we're a choice, and I'd choose this every single time." And in the quiet that followed, Lena reached over, took his hand and signed back, "Always." Thank you for watching this heartwarming journey of love, healing, and chosen family. If Lena, Daniel, and little Ruby touched your heart, imagine how many more stories like theirs are waiting to be told. At Kindness and Love Tales, we believe in the power of compassion and second chances. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale that might just restore your faith in love. See you in the next story.